Hey, what's up guys? Today we're doing a different style of video. Just wanted to change things up for once. Today we're going to be looking at the Medium, which recently arrived on Mac, and it's by Blooper Team, who have brought us the recent Layers of Fear remake, and a few others like Observer in the past and so forth. Now, the Medium is interesting because it was a poster child for Apple, if you can say that, an example of Metal 3, and also for Metal FX upscaling, and it was used as a demo for the game porting toolkit, porting a DirectX 12 game directly to Metal. This is also an Unreal Engine 4 game, which in itself has some issues because Unreal Engine isn't very well supported on Mac. And I thought today we would take a look at the game on about 5 different Apple Silicon Macs, for the sole purpose of showing that, like the Windows PC version, the Mac version is not great. Not great at all. So let's get into that. So here we are on Apple M1, which is the lowest possible denominator to test this game on. I'm running it on a 13-inch MacBook Pro. The Medium is set with 2 different gameplay sequences. We've got this single camera sequence. As you can see, the game runs okay on Apple M1, getting about 23 to about 30 FPS. However, where this is misleading is that the game is also set using another camera sequence where it renders 2 scenes at once. For example, here we are later in the game, when we finally have access to this spirit realm. And as you can see, the game getting about 8 or 7 FPS. And the reason this is so bad is because the Medium is rendering 2 gameplay sequences at once, which is freaking demanding on any PC that you want to run this on. Here we are quite a bit later in the game, and as you can see, it's still unplayable. Even if you put all the settings to completely the lowest, it's not going to really change. It only goes up a few frames. Now we've gone back to a single camera sequence. This is a boss encounter where this creature is chasing you. And as you can see, the frame rate is somewhat more tolerable, leaning towards about 25 to 30 FPS. But yeah, just wanted to show that when it's a single camera, it's leaning to being, well, more playable. But still, not outstanding. Moving on, here we are on Apple M2. For this demonstration, I'm using a 13-inch MacBook Pro with M2. We are seeing at 1080p medium about 30 to 45 FPS. It can vary greatly in these single camera sequences. When you are starting this game on Apple M2, you're going to be like, oh wow, actually this game runs, fairly well, cool. And that's all good and gold. But as we all know, if we move forward further into the game, this is all going to change. Here we are once again, where we have access to the spirit realm and the real world. Now, as both worlds are being rendered in real time, the performance is very, very poor. It's also worth noting that the RAM usage in this game is only up to about 7 or 8 gigabytes. So that shouldn't be a problem here. I fired up the game now in 900p and lowest possible settings, and kind of a little bit more playable. This game doesn't really function exceptionally well with a super high frame rate, but it looks disgusting. Now we're back to a single camera, and as you can see, the performance here compared to Apple M1 is quite a bit better actually. On M1 we were getting usually about below 30 FPS, but now we're getting a little bit over 30 FPS. If there was a way for Blooper to get this game to run with this performance throughout the game, I would highly recommend the medium to you, but it's just not there. Up next, we have Apple M2 Pro. For this video, I'm using a M2 Pro Mac Mini. Now, this Mac Mini has absolutely wonderful thermal management, which in many cases might allow it to have a much more steady frame rate than, let's say, an M2 Pro 16-inch MacBook Pro or 14-inch MacBook Pro. For example, it can be all the way up to 80 FPS, but that's a little bit misleading because of when the game has to render two worlds, the frame rate will absolutely tank. Not even the M2 Pro can save you from this ridiculously demanding game. When both of these worlds are on display, it's usually about 20 FPS. In my opinion, M2 Pro is kind of where the game is more playable for some. You can maybe get by, but it's still not very, very fun. I just find it strange that even changing the settings to their lowest and a very low resolution, 900p, the game is still not great. I mean, in this part of the game, it is about 30 FPS, but it's just going to vary so much. Once again, you can use this monster encounter as a great example. It's up to 60 FPS at 1080p medium. Or here, much later in the game where you're playing as this gentleman, it's all the way up to about 80 FPS, sometimes even higher. These things always get me. Up next, we have M2 Max. For this demonstration, I'm using a 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 Max. This is the same chip that Apple used in their WWDC tech session as an example of the game porting toolkit. And how does this chip do during this part of the game, or when these two worlds are on the screen? As you can see, the frame rate just absolutely tanks all the way down to 30 FPS. 30 FPS on M2 Max, it's really bad. To be fair, there will be some parts of the game where the frame rate will be a tiny bit higher, but it's not that much. Not even really at 900p lowest settings can you really save the performance here. Now let's return back to this chase sequence, and the frame rate is absolutely insane with well over 100 FPS. Or here, where it goes well above 150 FPS. I also want to test how M2 Max performs at 1080p high. As you can see here, it receives about 50 FPS. If we enable metal effects and balanced mode, the FPS jumps all the way up to, in some cases, 85. In this room, that is. At native 4K, the FPS is well below 20. However, using metal effects balanced mode, the FPS jumps up to 30. This room, during the opening of the game, is actually one of the most demanding scenes in the game. So you can expect 30 FPS throughout your gameplay on M2 Max. That is only when the game is rendering one world. Strangely, Metal FX can't save the performance when the two worlds are on display. For example, it's 30 FPS with no Metal FX enabled, and still 30 FPS with Metal FX Performance Mode and Metal FX Ultra Quality Mode. It's just 30 FPS always, no matter what you do. It's kind of the same story at native 4K and high settings when compared to when using Metal FX Performance Mode or Ultra Quality modes. You can see it is the same frame rate on all devices. Our last machine to look at is M1 Ultra, which is within my Mac Studio, of course. And as we can see, the game, it gets about 80 plus FPS, which for 1080p medium and a Mac Studio with M1 Ultra, that's kind of embarrassing. But as I've said before, this game is very demanding, and Unreal Engine 4 isn't very well optimized on Mac. I mean, come on, look at that. 30 FPS. But it's kind of sad that in order for this game to be borderline playable, you need a freaking Mac Studio or a Mac Pro. That's just outrageous. And it has to be M1 Ultra or M2 Ultra. This is 900p lowest settings once again, and it really doesn't improve the performance. Now we've got the running monster part up again, and the frame rate is quite nice. I mean, it's not really that much better than M2 Max, but it's just another indication of the comparison between the performance with the rendering of a single, oh no, I got caught! The rendering of a single world and when two worlds are being rendered. Let's also see how my Mac Studio performs at 1080p high. In this room, it receives about 60 FPS, which is plus 10 FPS over my 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 Max. If we enable Metal FX and Balanced Mode, the FPS can jump up to 74 in some cases in this room. At native 4K here, the FPS is well below 30. However, using Metal FX Balanced Mode, the FPS jumps up to 41. It's similar to M2 Max in that you can at least expect 30 plus FPS throughout your gameplay when the game is rendering just this one world though. Strangely again, Metal FX can't save the performance on M1 Ultra when the two worlds are on display at 1080p high. It's still 30 FPS with no Metal FX enabled and 30 FPS with Metal FX Performance and Metal FX Ultra Quality modes. I have no idea why Metal FX makes no difference here. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments. As we can expect by now, it's the same story at native 4K on M1 Ultra and high settings when compared to using Metal FX Performance or Ultra Quality modes. They are all about 19 FPS. Bizarre. Alrighty, and that was the Medium. It's a weird port, just like it is on Windows PC. It's very demanding. The thing I get quite confused with these recent Apple ports that have been collaborated on by Apple is that they talk about Metal 3. I don't believe we have actually seen a full Metal 3 game yet. I actually think this game probably runs on something like Metal 2.4 or Metal 2.5 just because of the way it's shipped being supported on all the way back to Monterey, which doesn't support Metal 3. I just think that Metal 3 is a bit of a marketing term in order to bring in some hype for Mac gaming. I'm not saying there's no such thing as Metal 3, I just don't think that games are fully utilizing it yet, or that Metal 3 is actually the be-end and end-all of what will improve Mac gaming. I just think at the end of the day, this is a poorly optimized game, and there really wasn't that much that Metal can do for it, and being on Unreal Engine 4 isn't going to help it much either. Unreal Engine 4 isn't great on Apple Silicon, and most devs just push a button to port it and don't really optimize it. Let me know what you thought of this video. It's just something different, so I thought I would try. Let me know what you thought. If you didn't like it, I'll go back to the old style. I probably will go back to the old style. I just felt like just doing something different today. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe and turn on notifications to stay up to date with future Mac game reviews. My next one will probably be Baldur's Gate 3 or Lies of P, which has also just been announced for Mac, so stay tuned. See ya!